I love Wolf of Wall Street.
I do too, yeah. If you can tell from the poster.
I love it.
Uh, Tom Cross, congratulations on receiving your second Oscar nomination for La
Thank
La Land. You're welcome. How did it feel when you got the news that you'd been nominated and also that the film had tied the record for most Oscar nominations of all time?
Well, I was I was blown away. I mean, I just I was giddy. You know, I was I'm in New York now. I'm editing another movie, editing a movie for director Scott Cooper, a western, and so the time difference thing. I didn't have to get up early um, to check the nominations. But the funny thing is that I didn't have time to check online or watch TV or anything because I was taking my kids to school. So I just, you know, business as usual, taking my kids to school, and then my phone started kind of blowing up with texts and stuff, and that's how I found out that I got nominated. And so I've come to learn that if you're waiting to hear news like this, if my phone is quiet, then that means nothing's happening. If it blows up, then that's potentially good news.
That's the first time you must be happy to be inundated with text messages.
Absolutely, absolutely. It was great. It was great. Always sweet messages and stuff. And so it was like a wonderful way to dreamy way to start the morning.
Well, you've won an Oscar for Whiplash, your last film with Damien Chazelle. Take us back to that night. I mean, this movie sort of came out of nowhere after premiering at Sundance and got these 6 Oscar nominations and then won 3,
Right.
one for yourself. So what was that night like?
Very surreal. And you know, I love old films. Damien and I both love old films, and we're fans of kind of, you know, the Hollywood dream factory. And so you know, it was my dream come true to be there, sitting there, you know, in the Dolby Theater. Um, it's just unimaginable. And to sit with the people I was nominated with, but also to sit in this theater with all these amazing, talented people, you know, actors, J.K. Simmons, and I mean, I don't know, I could go on and on, but it's very overwhelming. So when I heard my name called, you know, it was like an out of body experience. You know, I remember walking up there, I went the wrong way. You know, they're very specific about directing you where to go. Don't use these stairs, use these stairs. And of course, in the moment I started to go up the wrong staircase. So I kind of stopped myself. And there are these little things which now I look back seem so unimportant, but in my brain, I started to get hung up on them. And then I went up there and it was like I said, all out of body experience. It was just a big blur in a way.
Well,
Before I knew it, I found myself backstage. How did I get here? Weird.
well, congratulations again. Going from Whiplash to La La Land, what were some of the differences editorially between those two films?
Well, you know, they were very different in a way. I mean, La La Land was much more ambitious. It was bigger in scope, but also what Damien wanted to do with the editing in a way was much more ambitious. It was a little simpler, and it was more apparent what our job was going to be on Whiplash. You know, Whiplash was more of a two-hander, a much tighter, more coiled movie, and you know, it was more about tension. It was more about you know, this sort of energy, suspense, tension, kind of brutality. Damien really wanted the music scenes to feel like the boxing scenes from Raging Bull. So that was, you know, that was what we were trying to do with Whiplash. You know, with La La Land, he wanted a lot of different styles. I mean, certainly he wanted a lot of moments to be very romantic. And he worked very closely with his cinematographer, Lena Sandgren, to design these beautifully choreographed long takes. Those would kind of characterize some of the most romantic moments in the film in La La Land. But he told me that in order for those scenes to have power, in order for these long choreographed unbroken takes to really have power, the scenes on either side of those moments was going to have to be cut differently. We were going to have a different strategy for that, and the strategy was going to have to match the emotion of each scene. And so in that way, it was the same thing with Whiplash. You know, he wanted the cutting to match the emotion of the scene. It's just that it was more overt in La La Land. You know, you didn't have the long takes, or you know, you didn't have him sort of stretching that rubber band back in that same way, you know, in that extreme way. So with La La Land, you know, you have this long scene on the hilltop where they sing A Lovely Night, and it's this courtship scene where the two of them are feeling each other out, and he wanted that to play romantic, like a Fred Astaire, Ginger Rogers moment, you know, so he wanted to see their full bodies and how they interact with one another. So that was, you know, his directive for that was, you know, this scene is going to be have soft edges. So that meant that other scenes had to have sharp edges. So when they're in love during the summer montage, he wanted that cut very quickly. You know, you see this montage of them running around LA, and there's whip pans back and forth when we transition to them in the jazz club. That he wanted to really feel punctuated, and he wanted that to really sweep you off your feet and give you the feeling of what's like to be in love. He wanted it to be like a fever pitch. Likewise, the concert with John Legend, he wanted that to be the opposite of the courtship. He wanted that to be fragmented. He wanted it to be caffeinated. He wanted it to be cutty because he wanted to express a different emotion. And in that scene, he wanted to show that Mia and Sebastian are not one. They're not together or united. They're in different places emotionally. And in fact, Mia's not comfortable. So he really wanted to express the discomfort by having the cutting style kind of be pushy in a way, and show you that she feels a little bit like a fish out of water.
Right. Yeah. You know, I kind of, what you're talking about reminds me of seeing the movie for the first time and kind of noticing the way that stylistically it evolves as their relationship is evolving.
Right.
You know?
Well, it does. And, you know, Damien really wanted to tell the story through the language of dreams. He always talked about the language of dreams. And for Damien being the movie lover, you know, that translates into the language of old Hollywood cinema. So he really wanted to have all these old Hollywood hallmarks like irises and dissolves. He designed a lot of the storytelling to be told in montage. He didn't want any dialogue. He wanted to tell it with music playing underneath and just have montages. You know, for example, in the City of Stars scene where Ryan is in his apartment, Sebastian is playing the piano and singing City of Stars, and Mia comes in and they sit down together at the piano and they sing together. Then we transition to a montage that shows the progression of him signing with the band and, you know, Mia starting to write and work on her play, but we can also see that they're moving gradually apart. And that scene was inspired by the montage in Citizen Kane, the breakfast montage, where we see Charles Foster Kane and his wife sitting at the breakfast table and they're in love. And by the end of the montage, they're sitting on opposite ends of the table reading rival newspapers, you know. So, you know, there's a way that he wanted to tell the story using these old Hollywood techniques, and those techniques would be an expression of what was going on in the hearts of our characters. But he did want those to progress. So, for example, you know, early in scenes, early in the movie, when we're going out for a night on the town, we have this beautiful kaleidoscope montage where we see champagne glasses with champagne overflowing, we see dancing feet, we see neon signs, and that is supposed to represent and give you a feeling for how these characters see Hollywood and how they see their world, you know, through Technicolor glasses. But later in the movie, you know, when things aren't going as well, you know, when they're when Sebastian and Mia are sitting at the dinner table and they're breaking up, Damien wanted that to be almost like the anti-musical scene. You know, it was very important to him that scene, for example, would be a very heavily weighted scene, a set piece, almost as important as, if not more important than, say, the traffic scene in the beginning. But in the case of the dinner breakup, he wanted that to be anti-musical. So it's no longer about our characters singing and dancing together. There's music playing, but it's a record playing in the background, and it's a record that comes to the ends. So his directive for that, in terms of editorial, was very specific but different from the other scenes. You know, he wanted the dinner breakup to be very austere stylistically, so he shot a lot of different coverage for it to capture these great performances by Ryan Gosling and Emma Stone. But his directive to me was very narrow. And he said, you've got 4 angles that I want you to use. You can have a medium of each character, and a close-up of each character, and you can only use those angles. Don't use any others. Don't use any wides. Don't use any 2 shots. Just use those 4 angles. And when you cut to the close, when you punch in close, you have to stay close. And there's one cutaway. You have an insert shot of a record needle going into the run-out groove that you can cut to at the very end of the scene once. And so by giving me these parameters, he really wanted to create a certain editing pattern that he knew would be repetitive. You know, it couldn't help but get repetitive. And in that way, I think he wanted to express or make the viewer understand how uncomfortable the scene is for those characters. You know, the characters, it's no longer filled with, you know, these dreamy hallmarks of Hollywood. It's completely stripped down, and it's about facing reality. And he thought the best way to show that would be to strip it down stylistically, and to the point where the cutting just gets very repetitive. And then once we punch in close, it gets even more uncomfortable because we're in a place size-wise on the big wide screen where you can't hide. So that was that's an example of how, you know, how well thought out Damien's strategies were. You know, he really plotted out where the movie would go stylistically, and that was a place where, you know, all the stuff we had built up, all the stylistic and editorial choices, he wanted to sort of dampen and strip away for that moment.
Right. You talk about influence and montage, and that reminds me of the ending of the movie, which, if people haven't seen La La Land yet, I don't know what you've been doing. But you know, I mean, it's this clever little homage to, you know, the sequences in like Singing in the Rain, Bandwagon, American in Paris. Can you talk a little bit about constructing that sequence?
Right. Well, that scene, we refer to it as the epilogue, which in my mind starts with the last season card, which says winter 5 years later. And we follow Mia, and we meet up with her at, you know, at her apartment, where she's with her husband, who's not Sebastian. These are hopefully, you know, these are spoilers for people who haven't seen the film yet. But and then we also follow Sebastian, and we see that he's setting up his jazz club and having this piano tuned. And then the 2 characters converge by accident. They meet by accident in Sebastian's jazz club. Well, when Sebastian starts playing, he sees her, and he's inspired to start playing their song, their theme. And it takes them both back. The way I think I like to look at it is it takes them both back, and they both have this collective fantasy. There's a different way to, I mean, some people read it differently. Some people say it's Mia's fantasy or her dream. Some people say it's Sebastian's. You know, I like to think it's kind of theirs collectively, and in that way the audiences as well. But we go into this alternative reality. We go back in time. We sort of flash back in time when they first encounter each other, and instead of Sebastian brushing her off in the restaurant, you know, he grabs her and kisses her, and then we begin an alternate reality. What would have happened if? And we go through this whole kind of dream version, fantasy version of their lives. And then reality kind of catches up with them at the end. Well, this scene, I think, in a way, was the scene that that Damien made the movie for. It was kind of an excuse for him to make the movie. It was very important to him. So when when he finished shooting and he and I sat down to start editing, um, he made a decision to not start cutting at the beginning. He said, let's start at the end, because he knew that that scene was the most important scene. He also knew that all of the stylistic choices that we had, that we were going to deal with in the run of the movie, all of those hallmarks and editorial styles, he knew that all of them would come into play at the end, during the epilogue. The epilogue is kind of almost like the fireworks finale. It's akin to, in some ways, roughly at least, the end of Whiplash. It's the big finale. And so all of, whatever we set up stylistically at the end, how that plays out, he wanted to have that at a place where he felt comfortable with it, so that we could almost kind of, back into that, so we could shoehorn into the ending. So, and at very least, he said to me jokingly, at least if we finish this, at very least we'll have an ending. If the movie fails, at least we'll have this. It was really important to him to get it right. And you can see what I'm talking about. I mean, in the ending, it's really a mini version of the entire movie. It's like the movie in a microcosm. So it has all the elements. It has montages. It has all the rhythms. One thing Damien talked about was the movie having different rhythms of romance. So that you could have what I described as the slow, languid courtship moments, but you'd also have the fast moments where you would have that would be used to express the fever pitch of falling in love. And so all of those rhythms come into play and are there in the ending, as well as stylistic devices like irises in and out and dissolves and fades and stuff like that. So and also the precision, I mean, that's something that's very important to Damien, is the precision of where the music, the downbeats in the music hit certain places in the picture. And he really he's very well prepared when he shoots a movie. So he really tries to pre-plan all of those. And most of those are as he had planned, but a lot of them we find evolve because, the original ending, there was actually more material. And we had to do what you often do when you're editing, is you distill and distill and distill and make it tighter and tighter. And when we do that, things start hitting differently in the music. So a lot of what you saw at the end is as originally designed, but also a lot of it, the way it hits, we had to get to that place. We had to cut picture and find ways to make that work with the music. And then we would cut music and then take the music to a certain point. Then we'd have to alter the picture to match that. We had a very unique way of working with the music and working with Justin Hurwitz, the composer on this movie. Unique in that I've never done this process before. He was in a room adjoining my editing room. And so whenever we had a musical need, we would pop our head in, we'd knock on the door and we'd pop our head in and say, Justin, come take a look at this scene. We need you to alter one of your cues. And he would alter it. But there's a limit to how much you can alter before it sounds bad musically. So he would take it and he'd say, listen, I can't do it in the time you need it, but I can do this. And then we say, great, give me the music, and now I'll match the picture. I'll work the picture out and find a way to reconcile that. So it was a very, fine tooth comb. We were really, it took a long time to find the right balance. I worked on the movie for nearly a year to find the right balance.
Wow, no kidding.
Yeah.
So I mean, all that hard work certainly paid off. Why do you think the film has had such an impact on people who've seen it? Not just with all these Oscar nominations, but audiences are loving it and going to see it.
I like to think. I mean, first of all the nominations and all of that success that the movie's having is well beyond, I think, certainly well beyond what I thought was going to happen, and I think well beyond what Damien thought was going to happen. When he and I sat in the editing room, I think our hope was always that well, our main hope is always that, like, we hope people see the movie.
Right.
See it. We just hope they see it, let alone, you know, like it. But of course, we hope they like it. But I think we're always hoping that that, you know, Emma and Ryan, that their hard work would be noticed, and that was, you know, those were kind of our hopes and dreams for the movie. And so all this stuff that's happening, the 14 nominations, is kind of insane. But it feels great because, you know, one of the things that you know is important to the movie is this sort of dream fantasy of Hollywood. You know, you know, you have these characters who are artists who dream big, and in a way, you know, that's like Damien. That's like all the artists and filmmakers, you know, and film people who worked on the movie. You know, they all love working on movies, and I know that when I read the script for this, I was like, this is a movie that I'm so happy that Damien is making and directing, and because I love movies and I love Hollywood, and I have certain dreamy, idealistic visions of you know, of Hollywood in my head, and so I think that's tapping into something with audiences. In other words, you know, it's a way for people to, you know, escape and feel romantic, and not feel cynical. I mean, the characters are very earnest. They're pretty straightforward. They're not really, with a couple exceptional moments, they're not really biting or mean-spirited. The movie kind of wears its heart on its sleeve, and I think it's very honest in that way. It's not trying to be, you know, cool or anything like that overtly. I think it's about, it really is centered on these two characters who are good people, and they just have their dreams, you know, and we see them get vulnerable with their dreams, and it's a classic story of in some ways of artists achieving their dreams, you know, against all odds, it would seem. So I think that is somewhat inspiring for people, you know. Yeah. I think even though it's melancholy, there's the ending is bittersweet. I think generally it's a positive, happy story. And I think in terms of the bittersweet, I think that's something that allows people to leave the theater and think about, you know, and have conversations about.
Absolutely. Well, Tom Cross, again, congratulations on your nomination, and thank you so much.
Thank you so much, man. Great talking to you.
Same here. Have a good one.
Be well. Take care.